Welcome everyone, I hope you're all well and enjoying the channel. It's still growing very fast, we're almost at 3,000 subscribers in just almost 6 months. If you're not subscribed already, be sure to do so you can keep up with all of these spiritual topics and explorations. And on that note, that brings me on to the subject of this episode, which relates to why do we even feel the need to read and watch these videos and books in the first place? To pursue spiritual wisdom or seek guidance from a teacher? Doing things like this, as well as doing things like yoga, meditation, transmutation, astral projection, usually has some sort of spiritual goal or objective, right? There's many ways we could call this objective, but one of the most common concepts is called enlightenment. So I'm going to try and clarify this idea of enlightenment. I'm going to explain what it is, what it is not, and try to point towards the reality of what such a state of consciousness implies. But you have to keep in mind that ultimately myself or anyone else cannot logically say what enlightenment actually is, because it is not a logical thing, but we can point towards its reality. And so it may take more of a subtle, a more deeper state of mind to resonate with what I'm going to say in this episode. Perhaps, maybe while you listen, you might even shift into a state of consciousness which is going towards this dimension of enlightenment, if you really listen, as opposed to thinking or rationalizing about these ideas. So, what is enlightenment? And is enlightenment the end goal, like it so seems in religions such as Buddhism? What actually happens when we reach a state of enlightenment? These are some of the common questions I get, and I was recently asked about it by a Patreon called Bulway from the Astral Doorway Discord, which led me to making this video. And he asked these sorts of questions in a very sincere way, and I think a lot of people share the same sentiment about this idea of enlightenment and what it means for our life and where we're going, because this inquiry is natural, right? Because we all more or less wonder or think, what is the point of all of this? Where am I going? Where will all of this lead eventually? All of this seeking and meditating, and we try to imagine what it is or what it will be like when we are in some sort of heightened, enlightened, godlike state or something like that, right? That's a common and understandable way of thinking for us to have. But if we don't move beyond these thoughts themselves, beyond wondering about what's going to happen in the future, then we may not understand the deeper truth behind it. And part of understanding the truth behind all of these questions is in understanding that the ego thinks that it must become more, or to learn more, or to be more spiritual in order to achieve the goal of enlightenment. So, this is a very tricky pursuit that can become even more trickier when we are actively living from a state of egoic desire and desperate kind of neediness to be more than what we are now. which is ultimately an illusion. It's an illusion to think that you will become more in the future. Sure, your mind, experiences, and memories and knowledge can accumulate more, but what you actually are in your innermost essence is always whole, always at that so called goal. It is really always enlightened. But when we speak of this, we have to be mindful that it is impossible to imagine what enlightenment is. In order to understand it, you can only be it, and only then will you get it. So, enlightenment is not about cultivating some wonderful thought form, but it is more about a state of profound being and realization. To be rooted in being is to be aware of at an illuminating and exposing level the activity and movement and play of your thoughts. In other words, the play of illusion within you. In other words, the full comprehension and understanding of the self or the ego. Enlightenment implies seeing through the veil, through the illusory way of perceiving reality through the filter of dreams and unconsciousness, which can either be on a individual level or collective level. This is what is called in Buddhism Maya. So, at first, when we seek enlightenment, we usually are playing the game of being a spiritual seeker. But that is only part of the journey. Eventually, one has to realize that being identified as a seeker who will find something in the future is actually paradoxically counterproductive because you cannot find enlightenment in the future. And actively thinking that you will becomes a habit that you never really reach as long as you stay in that sort of state of being and level of understanding. Enlightenment is something that blossoms here and now through deep realization. Another common question I get asked is, Jean, are you enlightened? I usually respond with something like, do you know that it would be extremely rare for an enlightened person to actually say they are enlightened? And why, people ask? Well, because one effect of being enlightened is to realize how much you do not know. Contrary to the Western idea that the more one knows, the wiser they are. However, in terms of consciousness, the more one realizes that they truly know nothing on the deeper level of reality is the beginning of true wisdom. Having the inner strength to let go of all your ideas and delusions about the world and having the courage to be empty in the presence of direct experience and life is the beginning of this real wisdom that comes from enlightenment. Becoming enlightened and taking joy in the fact that you know nothing points towards the fact that enlightenment is not an end goal, but in many ways it is the start of the path, the true spiritual path. It is the start of realizing that you weren't enlightened on the level of your mind to begin with, or any part of you to begin with. That's if you're really honest with yourself, of course. You have to be tremendously sincere and honest to realize that you do not know as much as you thought. Until then, life is a fool's game, fooling ourselves and others thinking that we know, when we in fact do not. So you see, enlightenment is not something that once you are it, you are just that permanently. But it can happen at times or it can not happen. And on top of that, there are many multidimensional layers and degrees to enlightenment, just as there are many layers and complexities to consciousness too. Enlightenment is, by all means, not a simple state when you try to understand it intellectually. But by all means, it is a supremely simple state when understood from that deeper part of you that we're trying to get at. This isn't a university degree or some kind of scientific research. You cannot rationalize it. You cannot hold on to it. It is really the opposite of all of that. And from the perspective of the level of consciousness from our ego, enlightenment seems like something that is kind of boring because it's like you've reached a goal and that's it. But it's really not like that. And the ego just sees it this way because it always wants to get somewhere. It always wants to go somewhere in the future. It always wants to come to a conclusion, to finish, to achieve, to reach a climax, right? To give an example from one of my recent videos. So, when you become enlightened, it is far from just being in a state where everything is finished and you know everything. But in fact, it is only a purely joyful state in which imbues every moment with pure learning and understanding and wisdom, like a constant crescendo of music where everything makes sense. This is the real learning. And in reality, the state of the ego is the quote unquote boring state where things don't make sense and thus learning becomes incapacitated and retarded. Now, of course, you can only intuit and understand all of this for yourself when you really devote yourself thoroughly to the transcendence of the ego and doing all of the real work of liberating consciousness. But while doing this, the mind will usually ask, is not working towards a goal, a fantasy in the future, not counterproductive and ultimately an illusion? Well, in many ways, yes. This is how the mind never comes to its realizations or goals, but stays in a state of speculation and skepticism because of the way it's created and understands its image, its skewed image of reality since we were born. To realize the many ways that the mind and the ego does this, and to end that illusion, is the process and unfoldment of enlightenment. And so for many, enlightenment isn't something fun initially, because we usually have many ideas and fantasies and beliefs and false conceptions about ourselves and the world. And, we may regard to those things very dearly or be very proud about them or identified with them. So most people find genuine enlightenment painful or scary. It's painful for most people to let go of all of that. But is this pain also part of the illusion? Of course. But it will only be experienced as pain so as long as you don't realize that it's just part of the pain and that the pain is just something you are still identified with, or that there is still a part of you that is holding on. So, does the fact that there's nothing you can do or think about to become enlightened mean that we just do nothing and hope enlightenment magically comes about? Yes and no. There's still absolutely something you can do. And it's all of this spiritual work, right? Because, meditation and everything is not pointless, especially when done right. There is still this cultivation of aliveness and this gravity to moving towards a deeper sense of being intensely here and now, being attentive to our life profoundly from moment to moment, internally and externally, saving our energy, breathing, being contemplative, being in these deeper states of consciousness. This all leads to being grounded in yourself and gaining that clear light within that shows us understanding wherever we place our minds. This all does lead to enlightenment. So, as long as we stay on the level of our being and have awareness about all our chaotic and doubtful thoughts and don't become identified with all that. There is a difference between wanting to achieve something and sincere, genuine spiritual aspiration that comes from a longing to understand our experience and reality. Genuine spiritual aspiration is akin to how a flower innately feels the instinct to bloom, or the bird to make its nest, or a bee to create honey. Does nature think about these things in order to get that done? Does it get upset or depressed when it can't do what it's meant to? No, it always happens perfectly as it's meant to without strain or struggle. So it is a paradox to say there's nothing you can do about enlightenment, but at the same time, it is something that happens intensely and beautifully, and you can consciously move towards it. The truth is found between both ends of the spectrum, in the middle way of duality. And moving through this middle way between all our thoughts and questions and doubts and motivations, we learn to recognize what is illusory and what is not from this inner silent awareness and the intelligence that comes from that. And so enlightenment is this ending of illusion through realization. And thus, it is also the beginning of seeing the truth of reality, which is part of the greater whole, the greater reality, the objective reality. And through these purified perspectives, we enter more profound and intelligent dimensions of consciousness. Enlightenment does not mean you suddenly know everything. It means that you have developed a sense to see the great reality and therefore can start learning properly and intuitively. It means that you are no longer imprisoned and shackled by your own conditioning and unconsciousness. You no longer need to debate ideas, but you can sense them and their truth. It means to literally be enlightened, as in the light enters you, or you enter the light. It means to be devoid of darkness within. It is the illuminating and arising of light within oneself that fills the higher centers of your being, which you could call the head and heart. This enlightening can even sometimes be felt within the head or heart physically too, especially perhaps during meditation. So, enlightenment is this active movement towards light. The moment you truly realize that you are not your thoughts, but the light of awareness behind your thoughts, that is enlightenment. The moment you realize that you are far more than the idea and image of yourself, that is enlightenment. The moment you realize that the idea of others being separate is an illusion, that is enlightenment. The moment you truly realize that you, who you experience as a separate, confused, unenlightened being, is not actually separate from the whole and the universe at all, that is enlightenment. You see, the observation of unenlightenment is enlightenment. The moment you truly understand many of your problems are answered when you're in a state of love and surrender to everything that is enlightenment. The moment you realize that consciousness is interconnected far beyond your body and that knowledge can come from this connection within rather than books, that is enlightenment. Enlightenment is not a becoming of something. It is not about being happier or better. In reality, you don't become enlightened, you just become more undarkened. You see, we always talk about the light, but it's because we do not know what real darkness is, which is why we are so easily shrouded by it. If we knew what darkness was, we would easily overcome it. And to become undarkened, you become less of yourself. And so enlightenment is actually a destructive process. To let go of everything that is not truth and all the psychological complexities and unconsciousness of the ego. It's to look beyond the veil of illusion, beliefs, and the charades and circus of life. It's to stop living in a fantasy world and wake up out of your own individual dream and also stop being enchanted by the collective dream of others and the world that's been fed to our own conditioning since we can remember. Enlightenment is the complete destruction of almost everything we initially thought to be true. And through this, there is an arising of a pure, fresh, timeless, and ageless mind, which is necessary to perceive what is actually true. With the logic of our ego now, we say, when I become enlightened, everything will be great. I will understand everything and have peace and wisdom. But actually, the opposite is true. You have to find that peace and understanding first, and then you will become enlightened. And paradoxically, you are already enlightened. You just need to realize it. It's like a glass of muddy water, which is your darkened mind. You don't make the glass clearer by shaking it and thinking many thoughts or feeling disturbing emotions. You make it clear by holding it still and letting the mud and thoughts fall to the bottom. Only then can light shine through the water when it's made clear. And what happens when the light of pure consciousness can shine through the water? Well, there is also the realization that there was nothing to be enlightened about in the first place, because we realize that we are the light itself, and that the light that shines through the glass also connects us to the light that is outside of the glass. So, what should we become enlightened about when we are already all of this? So, some of you may be able to see now that it's less about changing the play of form and thoughts on the level of your mind, but instead to shift our center of gravity and awareness to the deeper parts of us that are already connected to enlightenment. That part of us is always whole, always enlightened, always full, and doesn't need to feel that it needs to add anything more to itself. That is our source of fullness and blissfulness of life. Through these enlightened states, we're much more equipped to look through the facade of illusion, through all of this fiction and dream of collective human drama and all our personal issues. The enlightened person looks around the world and laughs at how serious everyone is, and realizes and is humbled and joyed by the impermanence of it all. So the enlightened person finds great happiness and wonder in impermanence, while the unenlightened only finds sadness, sorrow, and depression in what he thinks is just pure misfortune. The unenlightened person says, "What is the meaning of life?" And the enlightened person says, "The meaning of life is life." But of course, the unenlightened person can't see this because of all that muddy water within. Unenlightenment is the unawareness of the magnificence and beauty of everything that is ordinary. And as above, so below, if one cannot see this majesty in experience and creation itself, then one doesn't see it in themselves either, or who they experience as themselves. They only experience themselves as this shallow thinking entity when there is far more to that reality, far more to what is on the surface layer of our thoughts. And so enlightenment goes back to the saying of Temet Noske, knowing thyself. And if you know yourself, you will know the world. And that is how enlightenment is understood, as knowing everything, not on an intellectual level, but on a much more vast and spacious and formless level. What more logic do you need than that? But of course, in the end, for those who are still perhaps confused, and that's fine and natural, I wouldn't personally get too caught up in the idea of enlightenment at all. It's just a concept after all, a label. You can become enlightened to a degree tonight with a good meditation session, by shining the light within yourself, doing this every day, aspiring to enlightenment, knowing ourselves, and learning spiritually is walking on the path of enlightenment. And there is so much to learn. We don't need to be so hard on ourselves. We are alive in these physical bodies after all, and life is very hard. Suffering itself, and as long as we are learning from all our life experience and suffering, is a path of learning in itself. And so, as long as we are alive, enlightenment is not an end goal. And it's also crucial to keep in mind that what's more important than any kind of end goal is that the enjoyment and appreciation of the journey along the way is very important, or else you'll miss all of the signposts on the way there. I hope that helps some of you who have been asking this question. I'd also be interested in hearing about how you would describe what enlightenment is. If you want to share, please feel free to do so with all of us below. And just before I go, a quick shout out to Pizek, Space Opera, Kafeb, Kevin, and Bulway, who raised his pledge, and also Haley, who pledged a higher amount than what's offered in the Patreon. So thank you all for joining. I hope you benefit from the group and the extra information that's provided there. If you'd like to support the channel too and join a group of fellow enlightened seekers, then just follow the link in the description below. And if you have any questions, as always, just ask two below. This is Gene, and I'll see you on the next episode.